before we launched features. This is the same process at Etsy, where I work now, as it was at Flickr, where I used to work. So, first, quick little, this is what Etsy is. If you haven't seen it, something like 96% of Etsy's users right now are women, so I thought it would be good to tell people what it is. It's a place for people to sell things they make. It's like a platform for essentially handmade goods. So that's what we do. Things like this. There's lots of cool things on the site. You should go there. And we've had a lot of growth, and we're really public about all of these statistics. I'll leave this slide up here, but suffice to say that much like other fast-growing websites that have any social component, it's growing pretty fast. And releasing features and making changes is always a fun and interesting thing. At Etsy, we do, again, the same thing we did at Flickr, which is that we follow a continuous deployment model, which is to say small and frequent changes is our MO. So it's not out of the ordinary for us to deploy maybe 10 or 15 times a day or so. Those deploys are quite small, and that's generally the point. That's not what I'm talking about today. What I'm talking about today is our new features. Features that are public-facing features. These are projects that we work on for a couple of months. This is new functionality. Or existing functionality that, say, is using new technology or a completely new code base. Something that introduces enough risk that you want to get people in a room to talk about it before you do it. I'll get into all of the details on how we go about that and what works for us. I'm going to, a little bit later, break the cardinal rule of presenting, and I'm going to read things from the slides. You'll understand why I'm going to do that later. So releasing features at least at Etsy is part of this process. You know, for things that are large changes infrastructurally, or we're doing something new, we're going to use a new type of database, we're going to use this new type of caching, or we're going to do something completely different. There's an ORM or there's not an ORM or stuff like that. It starts with an architecture review. Generally, an engineering-focused presentation. Sometimes it'll have a prototype, sometimes it won't. It goes a little bit like this. Hey, we're going to have this new feature, we're going to personalize home pages and that sort of thing based on what we bought, and this is how it works, and it's on a whiteboard, and this is how I'm going to store the data, this is how we're going to retrieve the data, this is how we're going to present the data, and what do you think? And the architecture review is, well, I just thought about this, and poke holes in that, and let's come up with a better way of that, and that's really the formation of the ideas, and it goes into development, and people start coding. And the best part during this process, at development and ops feedback loop, is that also is the place where we think about what kind of infrastructure, we order servers, we build new Nagios checks and instrument things with new metrics while it's being written, not at the end, because if you do that, next thing you know is everything's ready to go, but the box isn't monitored, and that damn monitoring is always a bottleneck. So if you do that early, that's a little tidbit of unrelated advice. And then we have this thing, this is go or no go. This go or no go meeting is what this talk is about. And then of course we launch, and then everybody's super happy, right? I'm going to press on this point again and again, that continuous deployment changes, what we're talking about here, aren't changes. These are very specific changes. These are features. Features that users are going to see. And they might even have questions about it. They might even find something broken about it. Making changes that are public-facing has this need for a go or no go. As we'll see, you'll be clear about all of these questions that happen during the go or no go meeting. This go or no meeting there's two pieces of it. There's this operability review, which is really nothing more than a list of questions for an audience of many people, not just development or operations. And then there's this sort of sub-piece of it, what I'm calling a contingency checklist. And we'll get into that a little bit more in detail. You might think they're the same thing, but they're not. I'd like to point out, this is not an Etsy idea. That's not a Flickr idea. It's not innovative in the least bit. This is pre-launch. This is a dry run in some cases. This is the last checklist that you go through, and that's the exact same thing. So what is it? It's a 10-minute get-together. It means that all of those people, product development, operations, support, if you call them customer care, if you have a community of people who use your site, they all have to be in the room. If one of them is missing, the meeting doesn't happen. All of them have to be there, because all of them have concerns when you launch something public. It should be the entire swath of the company. When I say product, I'm also sort of wrapping in business development or finance, any of the people who have concerns, which is to say, the whole company of this feature should be there. The first main point of coming is to get consensus. People might not feel awesome about what's about to happen. They might feel nervous, but getting consensus is the first part of it. Who here has been intimately involved with launching a new feature? Right. Who here has launched a new feature and it was a total success and it was awesome? Right. So why not involve all those people, right? You're not the only one who gets to drink afterwards. Who here has been in an unsuccessful launch? Right. So why should you be the only one who feel bad and guilty about it? Right? Yeah, the drinking is going to happen regardless. So what this means is this informally codifies, okay, that we are on the spectrum of we just started or it's a piece of crap to it is perfect, it can't possibly be improved in any way, is somewhere in there is this time we say, all right, I think we're ready. I think we're ready. Are you ready? Are you ready? Are you ready? Okay. People feel all right. That's the whole point of this. So now let's get to really what we're talking about. These are the yes or no questions. By the way, if anybody has any questions at all during this, please raise your hand and interrupt. The answer to these questions should be gone around the room in this 10-minute get together. And they should have yes or no answers. For the most part, we go back here. For the most part, the answers ideally would be yes. Sometimes some of the questions might be no, and that could still be acceptable, as long as there's consensus that saying no is okay. There are some questions that simply shouldn't and ever and can't be no, which means that you don't launch until that answer is yes. You'll see what those are all about. So, has the feature been tested enough to deploy to production? What does that mean? It's an intentionally vague statement. But the reason why this question is intentionally vague is it's trying trying to get at the gut feeling of people involved. Design, engineering, operations. If this is the baseline, if the answer to this is no, it means that you had the meeting too early. People aren't ready and postpone the meeting. This is a place where the dotting the I's and crossing the T's happen. Are there any final functional QA still needed? This is largely in product and development, stance. But as we'll see later, when you have a new feature, who here works at a place that has a community involved in the site? Right. So enabling that community or giving that community information about it, say an FAQ, right? So support, customer care, it got the little rules too. So this is the baseline. Is there communication about the feature ready to go out with the feature? So is there a blog post? Is there PR that's supposed to go along with it? If you have public forums, is there a public forum thread that should all be set up? Are they ready to go? And by ready to go, I mean when you launch, or is that person going to be ready to go and post? Does everyone know when it will go live and who will push the feature? Not Wednesday afternoon, not development, but Tuesday at 9:30 and SAM. If you don't have those good answers, then there's still a question, and people will still be blindsided. Even in the most successful feature launches, if you didn't know it was happening, but yet you're in charge of a group who's tasked to support it, whether you're operations or a development whose code is being used by a feature that wasn't written by your team, that's a huge bummer. It's a soft technical failure because it's a bummer. Has the feature been in production for staff? At this point at Etsy, this is just a standard operating procedure. It's very hard for me to think about any feature that goes to production that hasn't been on for the Etsy staff only for at least some weeks, maybe even a month, even before it was even done. We do this by setting cookies for certain staff administrative accounts. You get to see extra stuff. You'll see that this sort of weaves in and out with things like dark launches and on and off switches and that sort of thing. But it's in production for staff on production servers, not staging. It's in production, or some other specific subset of users. Now, there's certain types of features that fall in a small majority where this actually can't happen. If you have a feature whose whole point is to generate data that is part of a social graph. So, for example, at Flickr, we had people tagging, right? So I take a picture of you, and I'm on staff, and you are not. Part of the feature is to let you know that I tagged you, right? So you can't turn that on for staff unless staff can only tag other staff, which is a fine thing to say as policy or whatever. But if for some reason you don't write code to prevent that non-staff from being tagged, then it could happen, which means that you get an email saying, John tagged you in a photo, come take a look, and you can't see that. That's a kind of a leakish situation, and that's not ideal. Is it possible to dark launch this feature? Dark launching. Who here does dark launching? Right. Once you do it, you can never go back. You will never ever go back. For a quick definition, dark launching is in one of those scenarios where you have lower confidence, or there's some amount of risk involved with using infrastructure or code that you're not totally clear on, right? This happens a lot. This happens really easily with data that you already have. So, for example, when Flickr launched activity streams, we had all that data. We knew who favorited your photos. We knew who commented your photos. We just didn't have it like a stream in sort of a Twitter or Facebook status update. So we had all of that data. So what we did is we dark watched it. We had the regular homepage, and we had that code ask the databases. And we weren't really sure how much that load was. There was a lot of data that we were going to be asking databases for. We had the code grab all of that data from all of the various backends and then throw it away. That way we can turn it on and off, and you don't know. We can turn it on and off for a percentage of users. Which is the next question. Can it be turned on for a percentage of users? Again, the answer to this is almost always yes, because once you have the programming practice of assuming that this is the standard operating procedure, then, deploying things on a percentage basis is just, sort of standard. It's almost never new these days. Who here has the new Twitter? Right? I don't. That's a percentage basis. Does it involve any new infrastructure? This could be, does it involve new infrastructure that we've never used before? A new type of database, a new something? Or does it, or will it require new infrastructure because we expect organic or I guess say non-organic growth to happen? So infrastructure in terms of capacity. Right? We know that this feature people have been asking for this feature. We know it's going to be super popular. We know that people are going to be clicking like mad. So even though we're not using brand new, we should probably augment, make some guesses, use capacity planning to figure out what we want to launch with. And if so, are those pieces in monitoring and metrics collection? This isn't an optional question. This is a mandatory question. Should be clear to everybody here in this room that an unmonitored box is a broken box. It's a S0 or P0 bug. It's a stop what you're doing right now and fix that, no matter what you're doing. So don't even get to there. Don't even get there. When this question is no, then this is what prevents the launch from happening until it's done. Do we have on-and-off switches for this feature? And if so, are they documented? So this is a brand new feature. This is new site functionality. If something goes wrong, we'll get to this in the contingency checklist. Can we turn it off? This is going to be important, especially for those types of features that do involve a decent amount of risk. And documentation is obviously the key. Commenting in code is some form of documentation. And are all the leads, all the people, all the stakeholders, I guess, business speak, are they available for the launch and in communication? Not Joe is on the train, he's going to be in pretty soon. We should probably just go ahead without it. No. If you've worked on something for 3 months, know when the meeting is and show up. Or don't have the meeting. You're asking like 5 or 6 people to come to a meeting on a certain time. And for a project that you've been working on for a decent amount of time, and a lot of the company has invested, capital in order to make this work. Show up to the meeting and be extremely hard on that. If you're not at the meeting, this 10-minute meeting, then you're that guy. Who wants that guy? Is there a single and easy place for users to report bugs or concerns about the feature? So there's another one. So the forum topic, is it easy for people to say, I don't like this, or I think this is awesome? You want to provide at least more than just Twitter to get feedback, so that there's a little bit more of a direct line into what they're talking about. This you would think that this would be, I have this down as it could be no. It's almost never no. least for those companies who have online communities. Have all of the leads, or have all of the stakeholders agreed upon post-launch. It's all done in time to declare that the launch was successful. Meaning, we launch at 9:30, and at 4:30, if we haven't died, or we're not doing a post-mortem, we get to say it's done, which means that we're going to change our focus from insanely and meticulously watching this one specific part of the site to now just going back to looking at the whole site in general. If you don't do that, then it's like you're like the last guy at the party, and it's like, empty, beer bottles all over the floor. If you don't do that, also, it means that you may have moved on, development-wise, to other stuff when you shouldn't have. And finally, have we done a contingency checklist? And everyone agrees it. This answer can't be no. Does anybody have any questions up until now? Yes?
We have a lot of community activity, so how do you do a dark launch that involves activity between two different users with the feature? Do you have any kind of rule of thumb with that?
Yeah, and that sort of falls into the category of, you said dark launch.
Well, when you release it to a subset of users, right, and it involves user and activity between different users, how do you make that happen when only a subset of the users are actually seeing the feature?
Yeah, so in that scenario, in all the scenarios where that's been the case, then staff is that subset.
Okay.
I don't know of an easier way. I'm unconvinced that the amount of effort to write the code in order to make that work is really worth it. If the data requires such a large working set, then that you really do need larger than staff. At Flickr, we had what we call public data, and that was invite-only, sort of us reaching out to members of the community and doing basically, hey, we picked you. By picking you, can you prove to us that we picked the right person by not saying anything? And can you help us out? We picked you because we thought you could really help us out. And that's how Flickr video was on for close to 3 weeks for a reasonably large subset of users. And Michael Arrington didn't know about it, so I think there's probably a success there. So, yes?
How long do you use your on-off?
Awesome question. For percentage basis for C. It's a good question. So for large site functionality, forums, inter-member communications, listings, when people upload new listings, in Flickr's scenario, uploads, search, all of those are always there. It's feature specific, like people tagging. That, like I said, because of the on for staff and dark bits, those flags were in to begin with, because we wanted to be the code that it supports is being able to turn things on or off for subsets of users or percentage-based users. It's unlikely that we would ever have a scenario where we want to turn off, or Flickr would want to turn off people tagging now for a subset of users. So it goes from subset or dark launch initially. After it's launched, and it's some period of time, maybe at longest maybe a month, then you go back and clean up all of those flags that don't make sense anymore. But still have those, just sort of review them and see if they are such a high granularity that we'll want to keep it as a high level toggle. Yes?
Regarding times of launches, have you guys found a specific time of you generally want to launch features around the time that works well for you? Because, for example, we're always kind of looking at the trade-offs between launching maybe when traffic
Yeah, that's an awesome question. So glad you asked it, or that otherwise I said anything. So yeah, I mean, timing is a big deal. If you ask marketing when they want to launch something, what will they say? At peak, right? They'll want to have it, whether it's your daily peak or your weekly peak. If you have weekly variations, at Flickr, Sunday was the highest upload day by like 40% of any other day. Monday was the highest traffic day, and then it went on sort of down from there. And peaks at certain hours and that sort of thing. At Etsy, we try to strike a balance. We almost never, ever launch anything in the middle of the night or during low periods. We do the work up front to make it safe to launch at peak. Generally speaking, what we want to do, especially if we want the feature to get traction and get feedback quicker, is if a peak comes like this, we won't launch it up here, but we'll launch it like right around here, so that we can get the most amount of springboard as people come to the site this way. But that means we do a lot of work up front, which means that's because we have high confidence of doing it at peak. Because if we didn't have high confidence, then a month ago we should have dark launched it. Does that help? Yeah. I mean that's the goal is to enable feature launches to line up when marketing wants to, because that's the biggest bang for the buck for the company.
So who organizes that meeting and sets it up and or is this in person with different people? How do you guys?
Well, that's a good question. So for the go or no go, it's usually throughout that process, the timeline that I have, there's usually a development team and a product person. There's usually either a lead developer and a lead product person that sort of spearheads the feature throughout. And they sort of, there's some project management with that also as well that track dependencies, like this guy needs to get this done and all that sort of project management stuff. So it varies. It always gets done. It's either the team, it's either the development lead or the project manager or maybe even product. It used to just be me, but I don't know the last time that I scheduled anyone like that. It's just now a standard operating.
Did you bring that style meeting there, or is it only you change culturally, or is that just?
I did. So I started in January, and they were doing sort of informal version. Not to say that this is really formal, but they were doing some form of it. I mean, probably not with the same repeating of the same questions over and over. So, this contingency checklist. The contingency checklist is something that development and operations and product, this is something that you work on and throughout the process. The go or no go happens on that day. I mean, granted, the work to get those answers, yes or no, are the result of working on the feature for some period of time. But the contingency checklist is something that people work on. It's a known format. I'll show you in a second. And they'll throw things in there as they're developing on the feature. And there's two main questions that you want to get answers for. What can possibly go wrong? And when it does, if it does, what are we going to do about it? Now, I want to stop here for a second and say that I point out that this is ridiculously vague, right? One of the things is I could be struck by lightning. The point of this isn't to have an OCD view on this question. It's take it in the context of the feature. Assume that the site is stable when you launch it. How's that? And keep the context of this answer. It's a question. meant to get developers and operations and support people and community people to list, say, in their top 3 or top couple of the things that make them nervous about this launch. Some of those things are sort of internalized until you write them down. You're not really sure. And then when you're faced with what are we going to do, and you have to have these answers within the context of the greater company, that's where the really good stuff happens. The point here is that this has worked out before launch, of course, and you do it when you have a saner head. You do it when you're not under the gun. What could possibly go wrong after it's gone wrong is not the time to have these answers. So, what is it? It's coming up with an issue, starts with an issue. I think, we're going to go through an example in a second. I think that there's this thing about the feature that could possibly go wrong. This is the thing that I'm worried about. It's how likely is it to happen? It could happen. It's from, say, or it's pretty sure it's going to happen. Getting some information about it. How is it going to affect the feature? Will it show an error page? Will it be a white page? Will the site go down? Will we all lose our jobs? Will we lose business because our partnership isn't going to get worked out? What are we going to do as our engineering response? And then all of the other communication channels. Those have to get worked out. Now, so imagine it as a little bit like rows in a spreadsheet. And you just list these items. We're going to go through an example. We have this new feature, it's called coffee. On Etsy, you're going to be able to add coffee, much like a tag, you'll be able to designate coffees to your profile, to your user profile, your member profile. Others can favorite coffees. We'll have a page that shows all of your coffee favorites. You'll be able to bulk add coffees to your profile. You'll be able to search people by their coffee. Right? Awesome. The enthusiasm is palpable. So, the issue. What could possibly go wrong? Here's an example. The coffees you favorited page is too expensive because of the way that we're storing it for whatever. Let's say at load, at massive scale with these millions of users, members, then it could be too expensive. What's the likelihood of it? It's likely. It's the thing that makes me worry. I don't think it's super likely, but I know because I wrote the code that it could be a possibility. Because there's that one join that I just couldn't get rid of and I'm going to punt on for now. Comments. Here's a comment. Because of how we paginate coffee's favorites page, they're somewhat harder than normal favorites. If we do have to turn this off, what we're saying by that is that we either need to redesign it or it needs to stay off until the initial burst of traffic from the launch. This is an example of the description of why it might bother, why it might be listed in a contingency list. How's it going to impact the experience? Well, we're going to launch with a page, part of the feature, that's very visible, that should be part of the feature. It's how we scope the feature. And it's going to go away. If we have to turn it off, it's going to go away. And we're going to notice, and we're going to have to deal with that. So what is the engineering response? Engineering response is that we're going to turn it off, which means that we've got to work out how to turn it off beforehand. So set disable coffee favorites page equals to 1 is, outside of the coffee part, is a pretty common pattern at Etsy. And having those flags before we launch is, these days, it's just like any other part of development. It's just a given. The onsite messaging. What are we going to do? What are we going to say? What are we going to tell people when we take that page away? We're going to say that it's unavailable, and we're going to say that's a huge bummer. I can't. We ran into some issues. The coffee feature is so so successful that there were a bunch of issues that we didn't even think because the community loved it so much. So we're going to work on that, and we'll let you know when it's going to be backed up. Or BPPR. Was it so severe that you have to, send a press release? If it was a co-branded, you and another company or have a joint effort and there's revenue around it, you have to turn that off. Yeah, maybe you do. Maybe it was a really huge one. Any questions on this? So.
You're not really doing coffee.
We're not really doing coffee. It's definitely not on the roadmap. And now I'll go back to the opposite of the roadmap. Yes?
Do you actually plan for what if you're struck by lightning, or is key staff members cross-trained? What if John leaves and goes to Etsy?
Oh yeah. I mean that should be out of the scope of the operability review and contingency checklist. Yes, I mean in the same way that anybody's key members of the organization would be. A lot of the product documentation of configure flags or switches on or off is because of that. And that leads to, once you start, I guess you can call it programming defensively, but once you have that mindset and you see 2 or 3 features, and there's 55 developers at Etsy, and they're split up into various teams, and once you see a team having a feature launch for a really successful feature, once you see them do it that way 2 or 3 times, and once you see it really affecting your ability to respond to problems, right? Literally last night, we had to turn off relistings, which is the part where sellers can relist items that have expired. But we had to turn that off for about 45 minutes because the decision there is lose that part of the feature, lose that part of the site functionality for sellers, or lose the site. Right? Which one would the sellers rather have? Would they rather buyers not be able to buy their stuff at that cost? So I'm only partially answering your question, but yeah, I mean cross training. The go or no go meeting almost always has, even though it's required for like the stakeholders to be there. There's somebody on each team. Each team is invested in order to be able to do this. There's no scenario that I would be a part of who requires John Oswald to be the only person to know this, to know how to turn this off or fix that. So I don't know if that helps. So then you launched, and coffee is out there, and we're on AOL, and we're on People magazine, and and Tom Cruise says on Oprah that he loves coffee. So it was successful. Let's say it was successful. How do we know it's successful? Do we have a graph? Because we don't have a graph, it doesn't exist, as far as I'm concerned. One of the common things that we will do during this launch, we'll have the go or no go meeting, and we'll be in a conference room, and we will have on the graph, on the projector, a graph of whatever it is, not like leading indicators, but if we can make a graph of what it actually is to the business, to the product. In the case of Flickr, it's number of people who have been tagged in photos for that one particular launch, the example that I gave earlier. At Flickr, when we had the import your email address so that we can see if you have friends who are on Flickr that you're not connected to. It was connections that were a result of using that feature. It was a graph, and it goes up and to the right, hopefully. Then there's the, I alluded to before, are we there yet, right? So it's the end of the day, everybody's tired. There was that one clip right after we launched, but we fixed it real quick because somebody in the forum said something, and or an alert went off. We just had to tweak a couple things. Now we're good. You know, it's are we done? Can we go to the bar? And just because we're done doesn't mean that this 24-hour window or 8-hour window doesn't mean that something's not going to break. If something breaks specifically because of this, or it's clear that this caused a particular issue, who are we going to call? Now, in Etsy's scenario, the general answer is operations on call, because they'll be able to escalate wherever to whoever needs to. But it could also be that the developers who have invested basically their everyday lives for some period of time into it, they probably want to know as well right away. And on a non-successful launch, metrics. How do you know it was outside of the site going down and have people telling you? Maybe there were things that you missed. Maybe there was a piece of the feature that we didn't think about, or there were edge cases that cropped up. All of this stuff needs to be written down on the same wiki part, same page as the contingency checklist. Because this is the stuff, here's the stuff that could possibly have gone wrong, and here's how we were going to do it. And here's the stuff that actually did go wrong. Some of those things might even be a post-mortem. There's a complete loss of functionality or a severe enough loss of functionality that was that warrants having a post-mortem, a real post-mortem. Then maybe that's where that documentation is going to happen. Or maybe what happened was you did have a percentage, and you did turn it up, and something happened. You got to 5%, and you said, no, we've been on for about an hour at 5%. Let's crank it up. You get to 35%. Looks good. Now people got lunch. They're a little bit more relaxed. Things look fine. The graphs look good. And it wasn't only until like 65% or 75% you realized, oh shit, we've been totally screwing it up since we started. We're not even displaying this one piece of data or whatever. We're not showing an accurate count of coffee, you know. So we can either fix it or we can ramp it down. So the fact that we had to ramp it down needs to be written down. At what percentage was it when we turned it down? What time was it? These are the sorts of things that we need to know. And 43 minutes into it, that's the end of my talk. Does anybody have any other questions? Yes.
Back to the no-go meeting. How do you create a safe environment so that the 10th person, after 9 yeses, can say no and stop a release, and doesn't succumb to the peer pressure of just letting maybe a small bug slide and fix it later kind of thing?
Yeah. You let them say no, and you have frank conversations with all the people before you first do it. If this is a new process or if this is a new thing to do, and say, seriously, if you aren't comfortable, this is your time. It's their job to say no when if you see something, say something. It's their job to do it. Support, community, customer care, even sometimes product. These guys usually get overlooked and or might feel intimidated in the face of developers and operations because we're a rowdy bunch. And they should be able to say, fuck that, no way, this is trash. We gotta fix this little thing because people are gonna freak out about it. And it's gonna completely ruin our day and nobody's gonna be happy at that point. So yeah, I mean, it's a common thing that you point out. They need to feel enabled. And it's generally speaking why it's the leaders of those parts of the organization that you need to have come to the meeting. So, Yes, right here.
Yeah, if you wait, say, launch is successful in terms of growth, people like it, but it doesn't quite meet the business goals.
Right.
And you have a group of your users who's really love the feature, want it. Is there ever a time when you pull that to half an hour? Because it doesn't meet those specific business goals?
Because it doesn't make enough money.
Or whatever the goal might be.
I've certainly been parts of organizations, Friendster, where I wish that we had made those or to pull parts of features due to infrastructure, just simple infrastructure maintenance. Have I ever been a part of that? No. I mean, I've certainly been part of underwhelming response. The feature's out. It looks good. People who do use it really, really, really love it, but they're just a small population. So it's really difficult, and there's so much community goodwill or user-based goodwill that you'll gain by just simply holding, as long as it doesn't cause any other infrastructure problems or complications, making the system more complex from a code standpoint. Yeah, I've been in those situations. Not so much. I mean, the purpose of the go or no go is adoption agnostic. In my experience, that doesn't mean to say that it has to be, because finance or business development have their own criteria as well. Availability is only one measure of how a company's doing. Anyway, yes.
Does every feature have an API that makes it very easy to test and
Yes, for some definition of API. So like the metrics collection, yes, absolutely. I mean, getting at the crux of what the spirit of what the feature is intended for. We make lots of graphs. Is it always easy? No. A lot of the problem isn't that it's technically hard. It's coming up with the metric that you want to measure in certain types of features. So, for example, the activity feed, the Flickr activity feed example I gave earlier. What's the metric exactly that you want to watch to make sure that it's successful? Is it, well, of course, did you display the activity feed? That's obviously a big deal. But if you display it but they don't click on it, is it successful? I don't know. I mean, I think it's going to be a little bit on a case-by-case basis, and there's a little bit of good enough for now that has to happen. And again, it is easy to have happen when there's consensus. But yeah, having at least one or a handful of metrics before you go. But it's easy is another thing that has some definition. It's what you said. Is there an easy API? I think that's what you said.
Yeah, I guess I work in a place where sometimes features are rolled out in a way where you need to know that it's working about essentially strictly web transaction.
Oh, right.
Well, can I just make some calls that return a value? Oh, okay.
Right.
I made this transaction with a verbal that you get.
Right. So that's I understand what you're trying to get here. So there's a couple different ways we go about that. One is to build a bunch of I want to say generic. I hate the word generic, but build some patterns and approaches to get at those things. One of them is a really easy way to get log data into a graph. There's two things that we use. There's a metrics collection tool called Graphite that we use, and it's really easy to get metrics in and out programmatically. And there is and then we also use Ganglia for all of our infrastructure metrics. There's an awesome tool by Vladimir Bolton who wrote something called Ganglia Log Tailor, and it keeps a cursor on the log, and you'd be able to just write a simple script that will be able to get any metric out of those log lines and stay within bounds of rates and all that sort of thing and get it into Anglia. And we have a piece, I don't know if we've open sourced it. If we didn't, we should. We do the exact same thing with Graphite as well. So, so in that scenario, there's like kind of, as long as you're logging, there's kind of built-in graphs. It's just a matter of you just picking out what the field is. And if it's URL identifiable. And then the other piece is to bake it into the application. If it's so important that things like summary tables in a database, they can probably give you good information about how the application is going as well, so that when the feature gets rolled out, you won't have to think up yet another way on how to get at that data. Some of that points to involving, generally speaking, the people who build and maintain the metrics and monitoring are the operations groups. That's why it's really important, really critical to at least have the ops folks at least aware early on of what the feature is going to be doing, so that by the time that you're ready to launch, you've already had a graph. I mean, it says 0, but you've already had a graph. You know, and then if it's on for staff, you might see a little bit of, there's some dots here, the graph is working, and that metrics question. It means thinking ahead. It means having presence of mind to both make it easy to grab those metrics, no matter what you're doing, and thinking ahead to have it done before the launch. I don't know if that helps. Anybody else? Yes?
All right. Earlier on you talked about feature forking and cookie control feature forking for your employees and stuff like that.
Yeah.
How much of that is controlled on the front end? So as in they put in a query string and it sets the feature fork and it's on there, or is it the user profile where like you have a profile that you put there? Have you done either or, so you can just send out and say, hey, go to this URL and set the cookie, or do you try to control it by account?
It's a little bit of both. I mean, we take a page from Dio and use the world's largest database, browser cookies. And we have A/B testing framework there. We abuse it quite a bit. So it's, for the vast majority, they are cookie-based. Combinations between user profile is admin and cookies. So you don't just, in some scenarios, the code will just say, well, this person's not an admin, but I'm not evaluating that. If they have the cookie, they get it. If they don't, they don't. Some features, we don't want that to happen. And so that if somebody gets a URL, well, whatever, they pass a query parameter that's going to be ignored. Or they have a cookie that's, we're not going to pay attention to. So it's, I'm trying to think of an example of when we've done either. I can't think of one. But it's a little bit of both. And of course, we also use that same A/B framework. We use that for all of the ramp up as well. Actually, that's totally wrong. We use it for some of the ramp up. We will do very specific A/B tests. So for like search relevance testing, we'll put you in a bucket. You're in a bucket, a certain bucket. We'll use, we'll use this brand new algorithm that might be awesome, but might not be. So that's why we'll do it without you knowing. That's it. Anybody else? Well, thank you very, very much.